Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the new Regieleki VMAX from Silver Tempest, because it's got a great ability that can help out a couple of pretty useful V Pokemon. Let's get into that basic concept. We are really leaning into the Transistor ability from this new Regieleki VMAX, because it really helps out Vikavolt V and Raikou V, two cards that have pretty good text on them, but have just been lacking that a little bit of oomph. And we're hoping that Transistor can help us get there, really pushing that Vikavolt's base of 50, which is really pitiful, up to 80 or 110, maybe even 140 with double Eleki and one belt attached. Now you're 2-hit KOing V-Star Pokemon, whilst also having the very annoying text of Item Lock that can sometimes buy you turns. At least that's what we're hoping. And by the time we reach that sort of mid to late game, we're hoping that double Eleki established means that Raikou can almost be acting similarly to a Palkia V-Star. When you have those extra buffs at your side, you could be one-hit KOing a lot of things in format. So I'm excited by this archetype, not only because we're buffing these damages in general, but also because Lightning type coverage looks really good next set, because Lugia is going to be a new deck in the metagame, and obviously, yes, they can play Dunsparce, but if they are locked out of their Ball Search very early on, when you have to bear in mind their priority will be getting their Lugias into play, their V-Star on turn 2, and 2 Archeops in the discard pile, they can't prioritize Dunsparce even if they play it. And it's, pretty easy for us to just gust and KO the Dunsparce anyway throughout the game. And with Item Lock especially, they won't have any recovery for it in general. So, yeah, the type coverage is another big boast that the Vikavolt deck will have going into this next set. So let's have a look at the deck list. It's pretty straightforward. We have the 3-2 of our sort of main attackers here. 3 Vikavolt is almost always the thing that you will try and lead out with. The Paralyzing Bolt for 1 Lightning and 1 Colorless is so important here, so we can use Melony and Water Energy as our backup attachments here. So ideally, going second, we can get this rolling on the first turn. That's the hope, at least. And that 50 in Item Lock really does set out the stall and slow down a lot of archetypes. Many decks are revolving around evolving Pokemon. Many decks need setup from all sorts of other Pokemon being in play. So shutting down Ultra Balls, shutting down Quick Balls, all this other stuff is going to be huge. Even to some extent, shutting down damage buffs is also going to be important. Especially against Mew VMAX, you're shutting down Choice Belt and Power Tablets, so you actually stay out of range with your Vikavolt thanks to the reduction of double turbo energy. So that's also a really big deal, keeping your Vikavolt around, which is fantastic. So yeah, we have the 50 base, we can obviously Choice Belt up, and we're hoping to get Elekis into play as quickly as possible, so then we can be pushing into KOing Comphase, Cramorants, Sobbles, Drizzles, that sort of thing, very aggressively. That's what we're looking to do here, and that's really going to help us take knockouts, obviously, slow the opponent down, stop their setup, and begin that prize race, because as we progress through the game, we also have the option of the second attack, Super Zap Cannon for 190, which again gets pushed by Belt and by Eleki very nicely here, or just go straight into the Lightning Rondo from your Raikou, which is literally the same text as Suicune and Entei, which means it's 40 base less than a Palkia. But if you have double Eleki in play, you're actually doing more base damage than a Palkia V-Star, and we know how strong that card has been in the format. So we're really hoping that with the high Choice Belt count, and ideally getting double Eleki VMAX established in almost every game is going to be our goal, we can really turn into an aggressive archetype. That's at least the hope here. So the Raikou really does help out. Not just going to be a helpful card when the Item Lock is less powerful, like against Arceus decks, for example, that can still Starbirth and get into the game. You can try and be more aggressive with your Raikou V in here as well. So it's a great secondary attacker. Also not the worst lead in the deck. Obviously, you'd prefer to lead your Vikavolts most of the time, especially going second. But Raikou can at least get you fleet-footed cards as well throughout the game, which is no bad thing. So this is going to be our main 2 attackers throughout the game. The Regieleki can pitch in when need be. You have a 30 and switch to the bench attack, and you also have a lightning wall which does 100, and you take 100 less during your next turn for lightning and 2 colorless. Pretty expensive, but this can be a way to stop you being completely walled by Miltank. You can't hit them, but if you're using lightning wall, they can't hit you either. So it sort of forces a stalemate and then makes the opponent play differently. Like if it's up against Blissey, for example, they are either going to try and deck you out, or they're going to try and like bench a Blissey at some point and start attaching to it and attacking with it, which then sort of, again, gets you back into a position where you can attack again. So forcing this means we don't necessarily need to play a Miltank answer. It's similar to how Arc Gudra doesn't play an answer, but just tries to deck out the opponent. It's not the best, but it's something that we can do here. And if you really wanted to add more text, you could do in the deck list. There's things like Torment Morpeko, which I have seen if you really want to add in something here. And the VMAX is unlikely to be attacking, really, but it has a free retreat, which is fantastic. Helps us pivot between our stuff and gives us a card to go into at the start of each turn if need be. And that Transistor is mostly the selling point here, where we're buffing our damage. Greninja going to help us draw some cards. Lumineon, obviously a big combo enabler for the Melony. So with the Quick Balls, Ultra Balls, and Greninja, we should be able to get Water Energy in the discard pile fairly quickly, so that we can, try and get the Lumineon Melony going when need be. Corbat additionally helping us draw some cards, and I am playing a Drapion V in here. I think we can quite easily represent a tempo game plan. Against Mew, Item Lock can sometimes be good, but I'm a bit more skeptical, especially now they can have Serena instead of Boss, which means they could use Serenas to declog their hand as well at times, which makes me a little bit nervous. So I'm hoping that the tempo of Drapion and potentially even belted Raikou with a couple of Lekis in play can give you, just a prize race approach. Just try and be a 2-2-2 prize map for them, knowing that Drapion could take a 3 prize knockout, and possibly Raikou could even attack, on turn 1 going second. You could begin to start your race just with this guy alone. So we could go an aggressive route, especially easy because Drapion obviously isn't attaching to itself, so you can manually attach to Raikou's the turn you use Drapion, so even if they are going to Roxanne you and whatnot, you also turn attachment away from swinging with a Raikou for a huge amount of damage. So that's sort of what we're eyeing up here. So I do like the Drapion to tech against Mew. I think Mew is probably worth teching against for a number of archetypes. I think without the Drapion we have a pretty hard time. We're really hoping the Paralyzing Bolt does a huge shift. Maybe trying to Serena or boss up Genesect and slow the opponent down in that regard, but I don't think it's going to have a huge payoff here. So we are making a little one tech include. That's one to test out, really. If you feel the Mew matchup is okay without the card, you can obviously remove the training wheels and gain yourself a space back, which I'm never against. Onto the items then, we are playing a couple E-Search because we want to improve our outs to both these energies, of course. Switch carts because the only evolution we have in the deck has a free retreat cost, so we may as well get the little minor heal upside here and there. We have the Ball Search cards, obviously, to get our stuff going alongside Stormy Mountains. I think this should be a good amount to get things going. There is a debate whether or not we'd like to play VIP Pass in here. I definitely like playing VIP Pass in the Pokestop builds of Vikavolt when it played just the Drapion V and VMAX line. Sorry, V-Star line. But I think we have lost a few spaces here, and changing over to this stadium instead of Pokestops now, because we just have more Pokemon. Like, our ratios are just way worse for Pokestop now that we have so many more evolution Pokemon in our deck list. It makes sense to turn the stadiums into search stadiums, which means we no longer need the VIP pass that much. But I can still see like 1 or 2 coming into the list of VIP pass, especially when you have Grove Tablet as well. It sort of means you have less completely dead cards, and if you just happen to hire all into your VIP pass or into your Grove Tablet, then you can get activation from it, which could be reasonable as well. So even the random like 1 or 2 count of VIP could add to your overall search count here, but I think right now it's a decent amount. We've got the air balloons, very high choice belt count. The reason why we play 4 Karn 2 balloon, by the way, of course, is so that we can get that turn 2 paralyzing bolts, and we're not slowed down by just leading any of our non-Vikavolts, basically. So, yeah, very high switching cards here. We have the belts to improve our damage. The 1 copy of Grove Tablet, think of it as a comp search in the deck. Again, you could play multiple copies of this if you really wanted to. Obviously gets diminishing returns, but you could also foresee this as something like a VIP pass where it's so strong to find in the early games just to make your combo happen. I could again see more copies coming in. At the moment, I'm at the sort of ace spec count right now, so that it's never a dead card. But again, you could get funky over the list and lean into this that little bit more. Couple boss and couple Serena split. I think I like adding to our overall supporter count. So now we have 8 draw supporters, although Melony is of course the goal for turn 2 when you have bad hands. Just having a Serena or a Marnie for something to do that turn is, at least cross your fingers and get into the game. But it means that we have a very high gusting count, which leans into the Paralyzing Bolt, of course, to slow down things and get chip damage in, which is always good news for us. Marnie for some hand disruption, obviously good alongside the item lock at the same time. And Melony's the all-star. It means that we can chain our attackers pretty easily here. The Raikou and the Vikavolt both have a colourless in their attack cost, and they both attack for 2 energies, so we're hoping to grow our hand size with the likes of Melony and Speed Lightning Energy turn by turn. And as long as we're not hand disrupted, that's going to really give us a lot of options going throughout the game. The Speed Lightning is a great buff to consistency as well. Seeing more cards in the opening stages for our Vikavolts is obviously a huge deal here, and even giving us just natural like Marnie and Roxanne protection. Whenever you draw into this card, you can begin to rebuild, which is great news. And that energy split obviously makes sense here when we have the Melony, the Greninja, and E-Searches. It seems reasonable just so that we don't run out of attackers throughout the game. So it gives us a pretty healthy amount to see throughout the game. Onto the other options then. I've seen a number of Japanese lists that are using Stormy V. I believe Stormy V is a bit of a tech card for Arceus matchups where your Vikavolt is a little bit less effective, and because we play, Melonies and Water Energies anyway, you could try and get a big energy spiral in, limit the opponent to just one Arceus in some instances, or try and hit the thing that they've been powering up possibly as well. If you see it's an Arceus, you can go attach into your Starmie early, whatnot, especially if you've gone first, and try and represent that pressure and make them play differently. It could be an interesting option for you, and it's a natural free retreater, which is no bad thing in this deck list, gives you additional good leads. Ditto could also be a different option here. If you feel like there are matchups where you want to lean more heavily into the Raikou, for example, you could go and just give yourself a Ditto and possibly become that additional copy for you, which is something to bear in mind here. Like I said, I have played with Pokestop before with heavier shoes and VIP pass and a heavy item focus. I feel like that direction is a lot worse when you have so many evolutions and you want ideally 2 Regieleki in play in pretty much every matchup. So I have gone away from that direction, but it does give you higher odds of getting the turn 1 Melony, and that is obviously a big part of your win condition, trying to establish the lock as quickly as possible. So there could still be some experimentation with a more item heavy approach if you really want to. Maybe going skimpier on the Regieleki line, just like a 2-2, then you do fall prey to some prizing, and also Pokestop could go haywire, but then your ratios would be far better to get value from the Stadium card in the first place. A couple interesting tool cards. Cape could try and keep you out of range out of more things, maybe force decks to go wider, like make sure Palkia actually gets the full setup even under item lock, so even if they are Iridoring and getting to their Palkia V-Star, maybe they're still out of range if you're caping up and whatnot. Could be a reasonable thing to keep yourself around. And EX Boucher is actually an interesting one, especially now that we have the sort of Raikou pivot turn, where you go, okay, time to break the lock, let's just Raikou the rest of the game, because I have enough damage on the board, or I've taken enough early prizes with Vikavolt, I can just be aggressive from this point onwards. EX Boucher lets you do that little bit easier, because it means you can weave in a Marnie or weave in a boss on the turns you're trying to do the Raikou race. So that could be a nice one-off possibly coming into the deck list. And there is, of course, the option to go more disruptive with it. We can have the Roxanne and the Crushing Hammer going in to the list. Hammer's obviously slowing down the opponent alongside Item Lock, always a headache. And Roxanne lets you have even more hand disruption at your disposal. And when you're item locking at the same time, you're turning off ball search cards. So even though we're not playing paths, we're completely shutting down the likes of Corbat and Lumineon outs and all this other stuff from the opponent from getting back into the game, which is potentially very devastating for them. Onto the matchup spread then. Vikavolt's weird. It's not that heavily played in Lost Origin, but its win rate actually isn't that low into most of the good decks. I feel like it's just been one of these decks that's been online but hasn't really seen the light of day in paper play. In major tournaments, I believe there's been a couple that did make some day 2s, but no real deep runs. So yeah, I think it's still very effective into the Lost Box engines, really good at eating up Comphase, buying free turns from them. Giratina has to manually attach throughout the game. Sablezard loses out on a lot of their, speed of filling up their lost zones. They lose all their pivot outs and stuff, so that's a huge issue for them. They find it hard to get any attackers rolling, really. Crownmount gets hit for weakness. Sableye can get munched up very easily with one Regieleki in play as well, so they're really going to struggle. And obviously Tina is pretty similar in that regard. You're only really afraid if they can get early energy drops down and not miss a beat in that sort of instance. The Palkia matchup gets a lot better, I think, with your type coverage when the Regieleki really pushes you into that 140 a lot more easily. And just even into the 110, so you can make gust plays on their Palkia Vs and start picking away at their board. I think that's improving from what it was, which was already not the worst. Without the Regieleki. The Mew matchup, again, not the best right now, but I think the Drapion's going to mean it's pretty manageable to allow you to race, and there will be times that the Paralyzing Bolt is still going to be powerful against the opponent, especially when you have gone second and get the lock established. Lugia should be pretty reasonable, like I said, even with Dunsparce. I think you can deal with it early, potentially, or... they have to have drawn so well for them to have got Archeops in the bin, got their V-Star, got the backup Lugia, and got a Dunsparce in play. Like, they have seriously high-rolled you to be able to have done that, especially if you can develop that lock on turn 1 going second or on turn 2. So make them have the absolute nuts. You should be pretty okay with that. Kieran Palkia was actually a bit of a problem matchup from what I could see on the Trainer Hill data, but I think that should be improving with your damage output naturally going up. They're usually a go-wide deck, which means the Raikou, especially with the damage mods, should be more dangerous as well in terms of a race, which is good. Regis, you're shutting off their rods, so if you can target specific Regis, that's obviously going to be good for you. We do have a bit of fear, of course, against the Regi Rock, but Item Lock, again, should be slowing down this sort of combo. It feels like they need to get everything done before the lock is established for you to have a real issue. Hisuian Zoroark, they can race fairly well against you, and the Vikavolt part probably isn't all that helpful, so you're really trying to get some cheeky prizes with Vika, and then just quite quickly move into the Raikou to race down their Zoros, I think, is the plan here. Arceus at the moment, I think, is one of the harder ones. They can naturally keep a lower bench size so that Raikou still isn't reaching, and the Vikavolt is usually not that effective when Starbirth and a naturally high support account gets them through the game. So I think that's one of your naturally worst matchups, and I think Bliss Tank at the moment, we don't have any real answer for route. Again, we have the regular Regieleki V that can stop them hitting you back, I guess, to an extent, but they can still build Blissies in the back, or just build to a hand size where they can be like, right, it's time for me to change things up and come in with my Blissey now that I've got all these hyper potions established in hand, or whatever else they feel is the right thing to go for. So yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty awkward one. So overall, not many bad matchups, honestly. I think into the top decks, they either have to like quite high roll or still be able to get a setup quite quickly. Obviously, things start to look a lot dicier when you miss that turn 1 Melony combo, and that is going to be one of the downsides of this deck, and possibly why there's still many sub 50% on Vikavolt in the Lost Origin meta. Even if your damage output was improved, the fact that you're missing a turn 2 attack sometimes, a turn 1 attack going second, means that they just have too many turns to get established. So that would be my biggest fear for this deck going forward. But onto the closing forks. By the way, so many great artworks that we had revealed today. I couldn't help myself but put the new awesome Raikou on the slide here. But yeah, I really do like this new direction from Vikavolt. The Regieleki definitely turns this deck from, I'm going to try and bore my opponent through the game and just keep announcing Vikavolt's attack every turn. Oh, look, I locked you. Look how amazing this is. Look how many turns I'm buying from this lock that somehow worked and I just kind of cheesed you, to now being like, yeah, Vikavolt's annoying, it slows them down, maybe it keeps them out of getting a one-hit KO on your stuff. Oh, I'm 2 prizes up, let's go Raikou Smack, and win the game. I really like that you just have a much more clear win condition now, rather than the kind of murky, well, shrug, Vikavolt's annoying, and it's annoying enough to win games when the opponent doesn't draw naturally into like research into research or something like that. So I like that you have a much clearer late game, which is a massive thing for me. So you're actually building behind this Vikavolt and establishing a board, whereas previously it was like, when do you spend your V-Star power was like the only question mark for Drapion. Now you just have much more of a clear, this is why I'm drawing all these cards with Melony and Speed Lightning, because I'm actually getting my VMAXs into play, which means my Raikou is doing stuff from the later stages of the game. So I really do like that you become more of a tempo deck, and Lightning has a better position in the format going forward. So I do think this will be a deck in the game, probably among the top 10 decks, probably not at the highest echelon, because I don't think it's super consistent. And there are obviously times when the early lock hasn't disrupted the opponent enough, and sometimes they still you know, Marnie or research their way into just the natural outs of their V-Star and their ton attachment and whatnot without the need for item cards, and that's still going to be a headache for you. Let me know what you think of the Regieleki deck down below. Are you excited to see item lock coming back into the game, and are you going to be adapting your lists to respect Vikavolt going forward? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.